Permission. We normally, all the committee members aren't here because we normally don't meet when bells are ringing. But I just ask the permission of the committee for the sole purpose of hearing the minister's opening statement. Nothing else occur that we let her do that and then we go to vote.
I'm good with that.
You guys good? Okay. Thank you very much, Minister, and we'll get right on with it because we got to go vote.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation.
And then you'll come back after the
Yes,
vote.
yeah. Well, thank you for the invitation to address the committee today. I know all of you have a copy of my remarks. I will just be giving a slightly shorter version than what's in the remarks, but you have all of that information. So it is my pleasure to appear and to use the opportunity to outline the government's plan to safeguard the 2019 federal election. J'ai le plaisir d'être accompagné aujourd'hui de fonctionnaires.
I am pleased to be joined by officials today to speak to the technical aspects of Canada Plan, including Al Sutherland, Assistant Secretary to Cabinet, Machinery of Government and Democratic Institutions, Daniel Rogers, Deputy Chief of Signet with the Communication Security Establishment, and Andre Boucher, Assistant Deputy Minister of Operations for the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Elections are an opportunity for Canadians to be heard, for them to express concerns and opinions through one of the most fundamental rights, the right to vote. The next opportunity for Canadians to exercise this right is coming this fall with Canada's 43rd general election in October.
Over the past few years, democracies around the world have entered a new era, an era of heightened and dynamic threat that necessitates intensified vigilance by governments, but also by all members of society. Chaque élection se déroule.
Each election plays out in a unique context. This one will be no different. While evidence has confirmed that the 2015 federal election did not experience any incidents of sophisticated or concerted interference, we cannot predict what could happen this fall. However, we can be prepared to deal with any eventuality.
This week, along with my colleague, the Minister of National Defence, I announced the release of the 2019 Update to the Communication Security Establishment's report entitled Cyber Threats to Canada's Democratic Process. This updated report highlights that it is very likely that Canadian voters will encounter some form of foreign cyber interference in the course of the 2019 federal election. While CSE underlines that it is unlikely this interference will be on the scale of the Russian activity in the 2016 U.S. presidential elections, the report notes that in 2018, half of all the advanced democracies holding national elections, representing a threefold increase since 2015, had their democratic process targeted by cyber threat activity, and that Canada is also at risk. This upwards trend is likely to continue in 2019. Nous avons constaté que certains outils
This trend has seen the tools that we use to strengthen civic engagement co-opted to undermine, disrupt, and destabilize democracy. Social media has been misused to spread false or misleading information. In recent years, we have witnessed foreign actors looking to undermine democratic societies and institutions, electoral processes, sovereignty, and security. The CSE's 2017 and 2019 assessments, along with ongoing Canadian intelligence, as well as the experience of allies and like-minded jurisdictions around the world, have informed and guided our efforts over the past year and led to the development of a plan of action based on 4 pillars, engaging all aspects of Canadian society.
Therefore, in addition to reinforcing and protecting government infrastructure, systems, and practices, we are also focusing heavily on preparing Canadians and working with digital platforms that have an important role in fostering positive democratic debate and dialogue. The 4 pillars of our plan are enhancing citizen preparedness, improving organizational readiness, combating foreign interference, and expecting social media platforms to act. I would like to highlight some of the most significant initiatives of our plan. Le 30 janvier,
On January 30th, I announced the Digital Citizen Initiative and an investment of $7 million towards improving the resilience of Canadians against online disinformation. In response to the increase in false, misleading, and inflammatory disinformation published online and through social media, the Government of Canada has made it a priority to help equip citizens with the tools and skills needed to critically assess online information as part of our efforts to enhance citizen preparedness. This initiative leverages the expertise of social society organizations to support citizen-focused activities. We are also leveraging the Get Cyber Safe National Public Awareness Campaign to educate Canadians about cybersecurity and the simple steps they can take to protect themselves online.
Incident Public Protocol. This is a simple, clear, and nonpartisan process for informing Canadians if serious incidents during the writ period threaten the integrity of the 2019 general election. This protocol puts the decision to inform Canadians directly in the hands of 5 of Canada's most experienced senior public servants, who have a responsibility to ensure the effective, peaceful transition of power and continuity of government through election periods. The public service has effectively played this role for generations, and it will continue to fulfill this important role through the upcoming election and beyond. Le protocole ne sera activé.
This protocol will only be initiated to respond to incidents that occur within the writ period that do not fall within Elections Canada's area of responsibility for the administration of the election. The threshold for informing the public will be very high and limited to addressing exceptional circumstances that could impair our ability to have a free and fair election. The panel is expected to come to a decision jointly based on consensus. It will not be one person deciding what Canadians should know.
Je me réjouis du
I am thankful that in consulting with political parties on the development of this protocol, partisanship has been put aside in the interest of fairness. Incorporating input from all parties has allowed for a fair process that Canadians can trust.
Under the second pillar, improving organizational readiness, one key new initiative is to ensure that political parties are all aware of the nature of the threat so that they can take the steps needed to enhance their internal security practices and behaviors. The CSE's 2017 report, as well as their 2019 update, highlight that political parties continue to represent one of the greatest vulnerabilities in the Canadian system. Canada's national security agencies will offer threat briefings to political party leadership to ensure that they are able to play their part in securing our elections. Dans le cadre du troisième pilier,
under the third pillar, combating foreign interference, the government has established the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, or SITE, to improve awareness of foreign threats, as well as to support assessment and response. The team brings together the CSE, CSIS, the RCMP, and Global Affairs Canada to ensure a comprehensive understanding of and response to any threats to Canada. SITE has been building a baseline of threat awareness and has been meeting with international partners to make sure that Canada can effectively assess and mitigate any malicious interference activity.
The fourth pillar is with respect to social media platforms. La transformation du paysage médiatique canadien.
The transformation of Canada's media landscape impacts the whole of society in tangible and pervasive ways. Social media and online platforms are the new arbiters of information and therefore have a responsibility to manage their communities.
Manipulated to spread disinformation, create confusion, and exploit societal tension. I have been meeting with social media and digital platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, Google, and Microsoft, to secure action to increase transparency, improve authenticity, and ensure greater integrity on their platforms. Although discussions are progressing slowly and have not yet yielded the results we expected at this stage, we remain steadfast in our commitment to secure change from them. Le gouvernement est d'avis que la protection.
Our government has recognized that protecting Canada's democratic process and institutions as a central priority. Therefore, in addition to the new measures, we have committed significant funding toward these efforts. Budget 2019 included an additional $48 million in support of the whole of government efforts.
Also bolstered by recent legislative efforts. I'd like to also highlight the important advances we've made to modernize Canada's electoral system, making it more accessible, transparent, and secure. Le projet de loi C-60
Bill C-76 provides important steps to counter foreign interference and threats.
knows well, prohibiting foreign entities from spending any money to influence elections where previously they were able to spend up to $500 unregulated, requiring organizations selling advertising space to not knowingly accept elections advertisements from foreign entities, and adding a prohibition regarding the unauthorized use of computers where there is intent to obstruct, interrupt, or interfere with the lawful use of computer data during an election period. Le Canada dispose d'un organisme d'administration des
Canada has a robust and highly respected elections administration body in Elections Canada.
of threats we will see in the run-up to Canada's general election. I want to assure this committee that Canada has put in place a solid plan. We continue to test and probe our readiness, and we will continue to take whatever steps we can towards ensuring a free, fair, and secure election in 2019. Merci beaucoup. C'est avec plaisir.
Thank you very much, and I would be pleased to answer any questions now or after the vote.
We'll do that after question period. Just before people go, a couple things. Just after the vote, sorry, after votes. Just for the minutes, this is the 149th meeting. And one thing I'm going to ask committee members when you come back related to future work is which I think we can do really quickly, is the estimates on the debate commission, who you wanted as witnesses. And second of all, the parallel debating chamber Australia witness would probably be it has to be in the evening, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. Roughly what time, Mr. Clerk?
For us, it'd be about 6 p.m. and I think it'd be 8 a.m.
Okay, so 6 or 7 p.m. So decide if you want a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, Mr. Sims.
My sister tells me it's a 14-hour difference. Is that right? Yeah. So 7 would be 8 a.m.
10 hours. No, 8 a.m. for us, for them. 6 p.m. for us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what I mean. But do we go to 7?
So they don't have to get there at 8 in the morning.
It's really up to the committee.
So when you come back to check with your members, check with all your members, David, you want a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday night? Yeah.
For me,
Steph, you can see if you can chat with your people. That'd be great.
I'm putting votes on Wednesday. I'm going to put in dibs for Wednesday.
You're putting in dibs for Wednesday. Okay, thank you, Minister. We'll come back as quickly. We've
Just
got
not Monday.
10 minutes, 9 minutes left to the vote, so we'll come right back as soon as the vote is over. Okay, good morning. Welcome back to the 149th meeting of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The meeting's being televised. Today we're joined by the Honourable Karina Gold, Minister of Democratic Institutions, to discuss the government's plan to safeguard the 2019 general election and the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force. She's accompanied by Alan Sutherland, Assistant Secretary to Cabinet, Machinery of Government and Democratic Institutions, Privy Council Office, and the following officials from Communications Security Establishment: Andre Boucher, Assistant Deputy Minister Operations, Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, and Dan Rogers, Deputy Chief Signal Intelligence. Thank you all for being here. Just before I start, I got 2 small points. Yes.
Thanks a lot. 2 small points.
Yeah. 2 short points.
I mentioned earlier about the timing of the event. I mentioned we should do it 7 p.m. to accommodate Australians, but really the hour's not much of a difference. I've heard from others around the room that 6 p.m. would suffice, and I say that for the sake of my own health. But
Okay,
6 p.m.
we'll
would probably
discuss
be
this
better.
after the minister's left.
Okay.
Okay? And Mr. Reid? Just so people know, there's another time allocation debate going on, which is why we're going to rush to make sure we get the minister in. And could I have unanimous consent that we can stay partly into the bells for the next vote to finish the minister's testimony? Okay, and Mr. Reid has one other point.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to return to this point of order after the minister has departed, and probably after we've returned from the time allocation motion. I just wanted to say that I think there was a technical violation of Standing Order 115, subsection 5, in beginning the meeting at all. I will explain my rationale at a later time once we've dealt with the minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your forbearance in getting this meeting finished. So let's start with who's rounds of questioning. Who will be first? Mr. Graham.
Okay. My first question is, you're talking about social media companies. My very simple question is, what incentive do social media companies have to change their behavior?
Well, it's an excellent question. I mean, I think the first one is public sentiment, and trust with their users is an important one. I think their reputations is also important. Canadians are some of the most connected people on the planet. In fact, I think the stat is they are the most connected people on the planet. 77% of Canadians have a Facebook account, 26% are on Twitter and Instagram, and I think the stat is about 100% are on Google. There's maybe not in your writing, so maybe 99.9%. But we are very connected. We use these platforms on a daily basis, and in so many aspects of our lives that I think that platforms want to respond to that, and I think that you've seen some responses globally, not just here in Canada, but that they want to be seen as good actors that are promoting democratic values and participation, and that's why you've seen some change in behavior and some more public reporting. But I think that there's still more to be desired.
Yeah, and actions such as recent blocking of Faith Goldie and stuff by Facebook, is this the kind of action you're looking for? Is there different actions you're looking for from social media companies that would...
So one of the things that I spoke about in the press conference on Monday and in several media interviews since then is that we have been talking to the platforms about a number of different issues, but that fit within 3 buckets: authenticity, transparency, integrity of their platforms, and of the activity that takes place there. One of the items that we have discussed with them is just enforcing their own terms of service and their own conditions. Most of the platforms have wording to the effect that, they do not accept illegal content or violent activities or activities that call for violence or that demonstrate violence on their platforms, and they have a range of other things. Part of this is just about enforcing their own rules with their users, and I think Facebook's step on Monday was a step towards that, and I welcome that, and I think that that's important, and those are ongoing conversations that we're having with them.
Enough. And another of the committees that I sit on, we're discussing cybersecurity as a threat to national economic security, and so there's a lot of interesting topic matter coming up relating to physical and technological threats. How severe are these threats against our democracy, against Elections Canada, against parties, against anybody who is involved in the democratic process?
Well, we're taking all of these threats seriously, which is why, as soon as I was appointed to this position, I asked CSE to prepare this report, make it public. It's the first time that any intelligence service around the world has made public a report of this nature, and we're seeing more of that happen elsewhere. I also asked CSE to provide technical support for IT security to all of the political parties. That relationship has been established and it's ongoing, that are represented in the House of Commons. We announced on January 30th our plan to protect Canadian democracy, the amendments that were made to C-76, and then this update to the report and the ongoing engagement with social media platforms. So I would say that the threat is real. We're taking it seriously, and we're acting to protect Canadians.
And are we seeing any significant culture shift inside the parties, all of them, as a result of this work with CSE?
So I would not be able to comment on that because I'm not engaged in that, and I actually don't know about the relationship between CSE and the parties. I think it's really important that that relationship for trust purposes between the parties and CSE remains that way. But that's up to the parties to decide how they use that information and how they operate.
Go ahead. Okay. That's all I've got for the moment. Thank you very much, Minister.
Were you splitting time? Okay. Mr. Sims,
Okay, sure.
3 minutes.
When it comes to criteria, the criteria by which you, whether a serious incident has occurred. So, in your mind, what do you see as some of the essential criteria in order for us to be effective?
So that's an excellent question, and it's one that I think we can look at past examples around the world to say, these are things that would merit Canadians to be aware. So, for example, in the French presidential election, the leaking of the Macron campaign emails publicly, that was a pretty big thing that the French actually took it upon themselves to inform. The French government took it upon themselves to inform the French people about. The consistent and coordinated attempt to interfere in the U.S. presidential election that we saw by the Russians in 2016. Those are things that we would be alerting Canadians to. It's important to note that this all falls under the Critical Incident Election Public Protocol, which is a panel of 5 senior public servants that will receive information from our intelligence agencies and will make that determination based on consensus.
What does that information look like, though, when the panelists on this protocol, when they receive that information? Will it be a definitive, this is what's happening, or we suspect, and here are the data that we've collected, so on and so forth? I mean, how comprehensive is it?
It could be either, because it could be difficult to determine attribution specifically at that moment, but our security agencies are professional. They are, diligently looking at everything that's going on, and should they feel that there is something that merits the attention of this panel, they are duty bound to inform them of the information that they have at that time.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Speaking of the panel, who constitutes this panel? What are you looking for in the individual panelists to be qualified for this position?
So there are 5 senior public servants who make up this panel. One is the Clerk of the Privy Council, one is the Deputy Minister of Justice, the Deputy Minister of Global Affairs, the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, and the National Security Intelligence Advisor. These are 5 individuals, or 5 positions, I should say, because it's not about the individual, it's about the position that they hold, that have a extensive background in public service, but also have an eye and an understanding of the global context of the public safety and threat environment. And also we specifically put the Deputy Minister of Justice there as well to have a look at, how this impacts, things from a rule of law perspective as well.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Ms. Kuzi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Minister, for being here again today. I think before I proceed with my questioning, and since we are short on time, I'm going to move right into a motion, which I know that you previously had stated you supported, because certainly I do believe you are looking to PROC to assist you in these challenges of trying to come up with appropriate legislation, given the balancing nature of all the considerations. So I move that pursuant to SO 1082 that the committee continue the study of security and intelligence threats to elections, and that the study consist of 5 meetings, and that the findings be reported to the House. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You want to debate this motion now? Or
No, I don't believe. I
Okay.
just will put that there for the time being.
and then you go on to your questions?
No, I'd given the notice previously, so this is the movement of the motion here. But then I'll move into my questioning. Of course, there's been a lot in the news recently in regards to the social media platforms. We've seen Facebook with 2 responses now, the first one being the repository, if you will, and then the second one in regards to the hate speech earlier in this week. Google, of course, has eliminated themselves entirely from our electoral process. Presently, we're still waiting upon Twitter. Now, you yourself have said in the media that that they have not, the social media platforms have not responded in the appropriate action that you would have hoped for, and certainly we look to you as the government to take some form of action in an effort to find the delicate balance between free speech and the integrity of our elections. Our leader, Andrew Scheer, came out yesterday. He said that he is open to the idea of regulation. So should these social media platforms not be willing to take any action, what are you prepared to do as the minister and the government in an effort to find the balance between these 2 mediums?
Well, thank you for the question, and I'm glad to hear that it sounds like we have multi-party support for action, which I think is very encouraging. And I would say that I think we're at a time globally when other countries around the world are also looking at how we can best achieve the objectives that we all share, which is to ensure that people are able to express themselves online, but we're not doing it in a way that would lead to activities or actions that harm our society. So I'm really glad to hear the comment that you made.
But what are you willing,
please,
Minister?
So what I've talked about publicly already is really saying that this is a moment where really all options are on the table, I think, and I really welcome the committee looking at this, and I think that's a great opportunity. I'm very interested in following what other countries around the world are doing at the moment, and I would point to the UK that released a white paper on Monday that puts forward a really interesting concept, I think, of the duty of care, which is something that I think is novel and interesting in terms of how social media platforms would have a responsibility to
Minister, if you don't mind, I'll move on. I don't really feel we're getting a direct answer from you in regards to the action that you're willing to take. I understand that you are evaluating best practices internationally, but I think the Canadians are looking for a response as to what you are willing to do to find that balance. So I, along with Canadians, very much look forward to what is ahead in regards to that. Secondly, moving on, in regards to the third part, you've said that CSE, CSIS, the RCMP, and Global Affairs Canada is working together to ensure a comprehensive understanding and response to any threats in Canada. However, in my evaluation so far, which is laid out in, I think, a good document, the CSE 2017, we look at the motivations of nation states, hacktivists, cyber criminals, etc. In my opinion, Minister, it is not enough that we understand and respond to any threats. What are you doing specifically, along with your counterparts, to deter cyber criminals or foreign adversaries from influencing the election?
So we have announced on January 30th a series of measures that we're taking here in Canada to protect Canadians from foreign cyber threats. Of course, the very nature of foreign cyber threats means that they are covert, and so they're not doing it in a way that says, "Hey, we're here doing it. But there are lots of conversations going on at the global level that are denouncing this kind of activity. Counterparts around the world have stated that. We've stated that here in Canada. And I think the very fact that we have a site task force up and running that is actively monitoring this, and we have our public protocol that will inform Canadians, are really important steps of things that, quite frankly, didn't exist before here in Canada. And so this is a really positive thing. The other part of the announcement that I think is really important to mention is the $7 million that was announced for civic, digital, and media literacy initiatives for Canadian citizens to have a broader understanding of the digital environment, particularly in elections.
Thank you,
and
Minister.
these
I
are-
appreciate that. Again, I'm not really seeing a direct, clear path of action that I think myself and Canadians would appreciate. Now, the one piece of action you have come out on quite clearly is the critical incident protocol, which we as Conservatives were very concerned about, being that this group of five was left in the control of the government, and that we as the opposition parties are sort of beholden to accept what they say through you to be full and complete information. And if I may say, I think that we are vindicated in our concern, given the already absence and departure, the previous clerk of the Privy Council. So to me, that definitely shows the potential
So I
flaws
would just
within
push
this.
back on that, because in the development of the protocol, all of the parties had input into that. And although it wasn't parliamentarians, it was each of the political parties. And one of the things that we did announce, which I think is very clear and tangible action and is really important to ensure the nonpartisan nature of this, is the fact that we have extended security clearances and ongoing briefings to each of the leaders of the political parties represented in the House of Commons and up to 4 of their top campaign staff. And that is something to really ensure that everyone is on the same page and gets information to build that trust and to have that trust. And that is something that is ongoing.
Well, I think we should have included the chief electoral officer, but perhaps we can have that
So,
conversation
I'd be
another
happy
day.
to talk about what the chief electoral officer stated, which was that when this announcement was made, that in fact his job is to administer the election, and that he has been engaged in this process, and that it is up to the security agencies to determine whether or not there has been a threat. And so I think that's a really
That sounds
important...
ridiculous that the one administering the election could provide a free and fair election, Minister, very frankly.
Okay, we're finished this round. So we'll go on to NDP. Mr. Christofferson.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, thank you very much for attending again. And I just want to say, unlike some ministers past, not once have you played a game or taken the opportunity for scheduling changes to dodge or avoid the questions. And some of them have been some pretty tough meetings, but you were always willing to be accountable, and that's appreciated. Thank you, Minister. If I may, I just want to ask one question, and then I want to turn to my colleague, Mr. Cullen, who is far more immersed in the minutia of this and will ask far better questions than I would. However, I have one. On the protocol and the protocol panel, I look at the 5 members: Clerk of the Privy Council, National Security Intelligence Advisor, Deputy Minister of this, Deputy Minister of that, and Deputy Minister of another. Every one of them, of course, appointed by the Executive. And Parliament is much like my dad. Trust everyone, but always cut the cards. So my question is this. Assuming that nothing is going to change because we've got a majority government who's decided this is the way you're going to do it, so this is the way we're going to do it. My question is, will there be built into the process an opportunity for Parliament to review the information this panel received and the actions they chose or not chose to take?
So there is a plan to report following the election on how it reported and how it functioned, and I'm sure that this committee following the election could take that up.
That sounds a little wishy-washy. I mean, a report reporting to who? Either there's going to be a review by Parliament or there isn't. And if they're going to issue a report.
The report will be presented to the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, and the NSI COP can review it.
All right. And what about PROC?
Well, so I think because of the classified nature of the information, that's why NSI COP was set up so that parliamentarians.
Yeah,
could
I understand
review
that, but
classified information.
I get that. We might need to have a little bit of discussion about that because I can appreciate that. Again, you know, I've spent some time in that world. But at the end of the day, they are guided by some pretty strong issues around intelligence, and that's not what we would be seeking. We would be seeking the information that was given in any action that was taken or not taken, as much as can be divulged. So if it has to be a two-tier process and we get a report from our committee,
and perhaps
fine.
that's a good
but
way to
at
do
the
it.
End, if I may, at
Yeah.
the end of the day, this body should not be allowed to proceed when they're appointed solely by the executive without, at the very least, a key scrutinizing process at the end to ensure that they did what Parliament would expect, and if we can make any improvements going forward. So clearly that's a little bit of work to, hopefully we can tie that up before we rise in June, Chair.
And sorry, if I may,
Yes.
so there will be an unclassified or a classified version that goes to NSI COP, and there will be a public report available as well. And so if PROC wishes to study that, I think that is absolutely welcome. And I think this process should be reviewed following the next election. So I absolutely welcome that from parliamentarians.
All right, sounds good. We just need to nail it down in the details, Chair, but we can do that. Thanks, Minister. And now to my colleague, Mr. Cullen.
It's interesting. Thank you, Mr. Christopherson. Welcome, Minister. It's interesting because the flaw of the design was somewhat exposed when the clerk of the Privy Council sat in front of a Justice Committee and then ended up resigning because, as he said in his letter, he had lost the faith of the other political parties, which was inherently one of our concerns with the design of your process going into something so sensitive as an election, and the decisions that get made, whether to divulge there's been a hack of a political party or not, can sway an election, as you would imagine, one way or the other. To Mr. Boucher, just a quick question. You've said in your recent report, which confirms a report from almost 2 years ago, that hacking into our elections is, I think the term your agency used was very likely in terms of foreign cyber attack. Is that right?
Attempts of foreign interference into
Foreign
elections
interference.
is very likely.
And what we've seen in the past in the U.S., in the U.K., and France has been one of the points of attack has been political party databases. Is that correct?
That is.
That is also true for Canada?
The intent or the methods by
Yes.
which the opponents are going to try to address foreign interference definitely includes the political parties' key information.
Because that key information, those databases, voter information, voter preferences, if somebody's looking to interfere in a Canadian election, getting access to those databases would help weaponize their lies, I suppose, or weaponize their attempts to interfere. Is that a fair point to draw?
Absolutely, and that's why we engage so proactively with the parties,
Yeah, I
so they
understand.
can actually prepare themselves and detect and react.
Right, and you're
if
providing that
decisions-
valuable advice, but there's nothing required under law, under the recent elections changes that this government brought in, to make those parties fall under, say, something like PIPEDA. That there's a legal standard of how to protect that vital information. Is that correct?
I can say that within the current method of work, the parties have been engaging with us. They've
understand.
been taking hold of what the important
understand.
measures are and actually taking action.
My question is there anything required under law in terms of the standard of protection for that information?
Not to my knowledge.
Right. So, Minister, why not? You had a report more than a year and a half ago warning of this as the point source of threat to the democracy, or the democratic institutions minister. The Standing Committee on Privacy and Ethics recommended this to you, that parties should be brought in and required by law to have this standard of protection to keep our elections safe. You chose not to do that. The advice is great. The council, the working with the parties is great. But you chose not to do that. Why not?
So we specifically chose to develop this relationship between CSE and the political parties because political parties have, they're separate from government. They're unique in terms of how they engage with Canadians. And it's important for them to have that independence, I believe, and I think you would agree with me on that. And that's why we chose to go down this route, to ensure that we were providing the advice to political parties. It's how they choose to use it, but particularly from a security point of view, to give them the best advice and the best tools available to protect their databases
But we're
and
talking
their
about
information.
safety of our elections. On the safety of our roads, we don't give drivers advice and let them choose how fast to drive. We give them speed limits because we know there's a danger in going above certain speeds. We know from your own report that you asked for from the CSE a year and a half, 18 months ago, 20 months ago now, that there was a threat, a credible threat, and that one of the access points was this. And you said, drive at whatever speed you like. Here's some advice that you should only drive this fast, but there's nothing required. And that's what concerns me going into this election that's just a few months away. A question about social media. You suggested that you were disappointed with the lack of action from the social media agencies in terms of hate speech, banning certain groups. Facebook went and banned a few, which is a good first start, but there's many more. And those groups, Faith Goldie and the others, had been existing on spreading that hate for years. You expressed disappointment, and you also suggested that Europe, they'd done more in the European context. Europe has laws. Europe is bringing in regulations. England has introduced some more regulations, rules to guide the social media agencies.
Well, they introduced a white paper
Yes.
to discuss them. And I would say with regards to the regulations, actually what's going on in the EU with social media platforms is that's a voluntary code of practice that the social media platforms have undertaken themselves. And that was basically the conversation that we've been having them if they would do the same thing here in Canada.
They're not.
But they, to date, they have decided that that's not something that they want to pursue. However, those conversations are ongoing, and I would say that after the comments on Monday, there has been a renewed interest in having a conversation about what they will do here in Canada.
I understand all that, but if you look at the main differences between Canada and the European Union, is the European Union has done much more in legislation than Canada has. That's
Well, so Canada is
Okay,
the
very
first
brief-
country.
allow me to
Canada is
briefly,
the
Minister.
first.
Sorry, I haven't actually finished my question.
Oh, but your time is up.
Thank you for the advice. So Europe has actually brought in regulations and rules, and social media groups have actually responded.
And
you
so
seem
has
naive
Canada.
and disappointed that they haven't
But
done the
so
same
has
thing
Canada,
here.
Mr. Cullen. So Canada, what we did in C76 is we are the first jurisdiction to require online platforms to have an online ad registry. And actually there has been response from that. So Facebook is doing their ad library. Google has actually said that they will not have political ads here in Canada, and we're still waiting to hear from Twitter. So when you talk about regulation, in fact, Canada has acted, and we were a first movement. Political ads are what we saw, particularly in the U.S. election, particularly in the British referendum, one of the primary tools with regards to foreign interference using online mechanisms. So this is a really important step, and it's an important method for transparency and to protect our elections.
Okay, thank you. Madame Lapointe.
Monsieur le Président. Merci, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Earlier, you answered some questions. I know that you could not finish, but you talked about a white paper. Was there anything else that you wanted to add? You talked about European Union, but in terms of the UK, was there anything else you wanted to add? This white paper was published on Monday in the UK, and it's so interesting. They mentioned the duty of care. So this term was used in the hospitality industry to make sure that, for example, they were working elevators in buildings, and this concept was applied to digital platforms. When we're talking about illegal content or content that might bring risk to the protection of people. So this is something that we need to be responsible for. It's interesting because we can apply this to digital platforms because they can be held to account. So they can be accountable for their platform. This is something new. This is something different. And this is a vision for the future. What we must avoid, I think, is to have laws and policies that solve problems of the past, but are not flexible enough for the future. So this is something I'm reading with attention, and my officials are also reading it. And we're also trying to see other things that are happening in Germany, for example, or in France and Australia. Things are happening there, and it's interesting. I think we could find Canadian solutions. Thank you. Earlier, you talked about France, and now you're talking about Germany. I know that at the G7 in Charlevoix last year, you discussed those problems, those social media platforms, and you said that there were problems in France. Well, with the US elections, it's clear that something was not working properly. So, can we go further? You are talking about the UK and the EU, but can you share this information so that we can learn from other people's mistakes? Yes, in Germany, they have a law against this hate speech, and they applied it on digital platforms. They applied fines, very high fines for digital platforms if they did not remove these images or these messages that promote hate. So this is interesting. I also think that we need to think about illegal content and how we can make sure that those platforms are not manipulated to facilitate this kind of illegal activities. We also must think about violent content. There are many things we need to think about in order to change people's experience on digital platforms. You said you were disappointed with the meetings you held with social media, like Facebook. So are there other meetings that are planned to make sure, you said that in Europe and the European Union, it is a voluntary code of conduct. So what would it be like here? Would it be forced? Well, we will continue to have the different conversations with those digital platforms to see what they can do here in Canada before the next election. My office has planned meetings next week, and I hope they will be more open to apply here what they have done in other countries to protect elections. I think Canadians deserve the same treatment as people everywhere around the world. Thank you. Is there some time left?
Je vais la prendre.
Okay, so I'll take this minute and a half. No, it's my turn. I'm very territorial. So earlier, you talked about the trust in the trust in the chief electoral officer. I trust the chief electoral officer and the whole office. I think that Canadians can be very proud of what we have here in Canada. I think he's the best in the world. Many countries receive advice from our organization. So I'm very proud, and I'm proud of what they do. They're very professional. They take these responsibility very seriously. And I think that the elections that we have here in Canada are elections that Canadians trust, and that is the most important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And one last intervention, Ms. Kuzi, for 5 minutes.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Minister, I'll go back to the critical election incident protocol. How does the team make their decision on whether or not to inform the public as to a threat within the election?
The decision to inform the public will be based on their assessment that will be derived from consensus as to whether the incident compromises a free and fair election. We have made this bar significantly high because if there were a public announcement, that would obviously be of significance to the Canadian population, and so it's really important that that bar is set.
But what are the criteria, please, that they're using?
So what we have established is a free and fair election.
But how do you determine if a free and fair election?
They will make that assessment based on the information that they have. One thing that I think is important to note is that this will be very context driven and context specific, because it could be that an incident that occurred in another country that we may use as an example doesn't have the same kind of impact here in Canada. And so what's important is for them to make that decision based on the information that our security agencies are providing them. One thing that I would note with regards to the protocol is that when they decide to make that public, they will be advising the CEO of Elections Canada as well as the leaders of the political parties. And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that both the leaders and a number of their senior campaign advisors will be given security clearances. They will be in regular contact with our security agencies to give them an update of what's going on during and in the lead up to the campaign.
Okay, well, I appreciate this. I feel as though we're just getting information we've received previously. I wish there was more specifics or sort of more information. Will the panel meet on a consistent basis or only on the occasion of an incident?
Do you know the answer to that?
They'll receive regular briefings.
Okay. The panel will receive regular briefings.
Okay, will they be meeting regularly to evaluate the briefings?
Well, they will receive regular briefings, and that will be up to them to determine how they deal with that information.
Okay, again, not very specific. Will political parties be notified if the panel is convening?
Not necessarily, only if they feel that they will need to make something public. However, what will be the case is that the political parties will receive regular briefings from the security agencies.
Okay, and what individuals will decide whether or not to bring critical threats to the attention of the panel?
Those will be left up to our very capable security agencies.
Okay, if the parties disagree with the decision to bring an incident to the panel, is there a means to appeal the decision?
The parties will not be informed of whether an incident is brought to the panel for the integrity of the process.
Okay, as I said, I think that we would appreciate a lot more information in regards to the criteria. So we know that adversaries have used in other jurisdictions social media to manipulate the public to create and polarize political and social issues. So what concrete initiatives have you employed to ensure that this type of influence does not happen here in Canada leading up to the 2019 election, similar to my question before?
So within C76, as was noted, their social media platforms have been banned from knowingly accepting foreign funding for political advertisements. They have also been required that if they will receive political advertisements during the pre-writ and writ period, that they will have to have an ad registry to disclose that information. Those are two really important steps that have been taken that address some of the previous issues that we've seen around the world with regards to how social media platforms were manipulated. In terms of other conversations that we've been having with social media platforms, I have discussed with them the idea of a Canada 2 concept. So for activities that they've been willing to undertake in other jurisdictions to safeguard those elections, that they do that here in Canada as well, that they label bot activity on their platforms. Canadians should know if they're interacting with a person or with a bot when they're interacting online, and that they should be monitoring for authentic behavior as well. I do know that the platforms are monitoring this space and that they are actively removing accounts that they find to be problematic. We would just like more clarity and more transparency in those activities as well, so that Canadians can have greater confidence on the activity that they're seeing online.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. We appreciate that, and I'm sure we'll see you again. We got 17 minutes left. Just a couple of things for the whip, as I said before the break. Scott, the point one of the things we asked is for the Australians, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and at what time? And you were saying, Scott, at which time?
I originally said 7:00 p.m. However, after receiving a wave of apprehension and hate, maybe that's a strong word, 6:00 is fine.
6:00. And Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday?
What city are they in?
Tuesday? Whenever we can.
So it could be, I mean, we're not sure of which Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
No, it'd be the first or second week back.
Well, to state the obvious problem with some of these days, that we could be running into votes at that time, which could throw things off. Sorry,
Thank you, Minister. Have a
this
great
is
day.
relevant to Scott. The problem with trying to schedule something for 6 p.m. on a Tuesday or Wednesday evening is that's right in the middle of when votes are likely to be. We stand a very good chance of standing up our Australians after they've gone to the trouble of arranging to be there for us. So notwithstanding those who expressed hatred and loathing towards you at an earlier point in time, I am concerned that we could actually, by choosing 6 instead of 7 when votes are typically over, we could be, creating a situation where they're cooling their heels for an hour, and that is, I think, a meaningful consideration.
So 7.
7 would be my own preference.
So 7:00, 8:30 in Newfoundland.
7:00 on the earliest Tuesday possible. That the Australians are available. Is that okay?
Would you be willing to have 2 meetings on April 30th? Do you want to have a meeting on the Main Estates and then a meeting that evening?
Chair, before we adjourn to go to votes, perhaps could we vote on the motion I put forward, please?
Hey, hold on.
Do we have proper notice of that? Because I haven't noticed a motion from Ms. Kuzi that's not that
Okay,
motion.
wait a sec. There's something else I just wanted to finish first. On the Debates Commission, I know you had who you wanted as witnesses. Can you just say that? For the Debates Commission estimates.
Which? Okay, one of each? Oh, that's right, 1 hour, 1 hour. 1 hour.
So Conservatives are proposing 1 hour with the Debates Commissioner and 1 hour with the Minister on the Debates Commission main estimates.
Sounds good to me.
Yep. Everyone agree? Okay.
Tough fight.
They're separate hours, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to confirm, no, that's...
Is it concurrent or consecutive?
And those 2 meetings would be the
People, we have
Tuesday and the Thursday.
If they're available.
Yeah.
As soon as they're available. Okay. And one other quick thing, Ms. Kuzi, before you go to your report and Mr. Reed's thing. Mr. Reed, could you hold up those reports? Do you still have them?
I do. As a matter of fact, I will return them to you.
One of the other committees, yesterday, if you were in the House, actually made a report was on foreign policy in the Arctic, but they made it in 4 official Aboriginal languages. No, not Aboriginal, but 4 not official, but Aboriginal languages. They made a mistake of not saying which one in the report, but I proposed to us that we would do the report that we did, our committee did on Aboriginal languages, that we actually get it translated into. Now, the way they picked the languages here is they picked the languages of the witnesses. So any witnesses that was Aboriginal, spoken Aboriginal language, they picked those. And I might suggest that we minimally do that and maybe the 3 most popular used languages of Canada, which would be Inuktitut, Cree, and Ojibwe. Mr. Reed, do you have any thoughts on that? Yeah, getting our report translated.
You know what? I was chatting about the point of order, and as a result, I didn't hear what you had to say. But if it's the same thing you said to me earlier, that's a good thought.
It's already been tabled and adopted by the House. Does that matter?
You know, I will raise one concern, Mr. Chair, if I could. This report, if I'm not mistaken, dealt with the North. Am I correct?
Yes.
And the Indigenous languages that were chosen are effectively the languages
of the witnesses.
That's right. The problem we have is that choosing which Indigenous languages to use and which not to use is an issue. I have no idea how to resolve that.
I just made a proposal on that, though, while you were talking.
Oh, what was that?
I said that, first of all, the witnesses, any Aboriginal languages, the witnesses that spoke before us, plus perhaps the 3 most prevalent ones in Canada, which are Inuktitut, Cree, and Ojibwe, which are some of them were covered by witnesses anyways.
Well, you know what? I have no objection to that. Does anybody else? I mean,
I would like to hear Mr. Collins' thoughts on this, if that's all right.
Mr. Cullen?
Those languages stop at the Rockies, which would be one thing. I don't know. I echo the sentiments of very much the witnesses having their languages put down properly, but the committee just arbitrarily picking 3 just by volume of speakers. It seems, I understand the logic behind it, but it does feel a bit arbitrary, especially something so sensitive as to how something is going to be expressed. As good as a report this is, I would just maybe give the committee some time to contemplate and maybe even consult with Indigenous language speakers.
Would the committee be in agreement with translating it into the languages of the witnesses that proposed to us on this study? I'll agree. I'll agree. Okay. Leave it up to you to find the money, Mr. Clerk.
Chair. Chair, I know you're about to go to another notice of motion and engage in a debate. I'd just like the opportunity to formally submit a notice of motion, also not to be debated today, but also to underscore that I'm just the vehicle for this. This is the work of a number of veteran, respected parliamentarians who are looking for changes. Mr. Reid is among those, and hopefully we'll be able to give them an opportunity to have their thoughts aired, and that's what this is about. But for now, it's just a technicality. It's in both languages, and it won't come up again until the next meeting. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yes.
Yeah. So, strictly speaking, points of order take priority. So I guess I'd be able to have priority over Ms. Kuzi's motion. But that is not my objective. My objective was to say this: we had agreed, sort of a gentleman's agreement or a gentle people's agreement, to be politically correct about it, that we would deal with the point of order after we return. But given the amount of time we're going to have left, may I suggest that we all know what the point of order is about, the sections being mentioned, so I suggest that we leave it and return to it at our next meeting, which will be after the break. That'll give people a chance to look over the procedural questions, and we'll have a more informed debate, and we won't all have to come back with 5 minutes remaining. Okay.
The next meeting when we have space.
Yeah. Sure. Yes,
okay. And Ms. Kuzi, where you want to vote on your motion, you basically said.
I raised a point of order on that, which was that we have noticed a motion for Ms. Kuzi on a motion on that topic, but not on that motion. I've never seen that motion before. And so therefore it would be procedurally invalid at this point, but it could be brought in as notice.
Clerk, you can use the microphone.
The committee's routine motion allows members to move motions when they're relevant to the subject being studied.
That's what I was going to say. Pardon me. Continue, Clerk.
Isn't that translated?
Non, mais est-ce qu'elle est écrite en français?
Has it been written, translated in French? Can I see a French version?
Well, she did it verbally, right? So you can
Poser en français, si tu veux.
when you're
I can do it in French if you want to.
at the committee at the time. So we'll just read it again, so then you'll get it in French, okay?
Je voulais l'avoir écrite.
I would have liked to have had it written. Do you have it written in French?
Okay.
We're our next meeting's on the estimates, but
Give us some time.
we have time. But,
I would prefer that's resolved today.
okay, well, we can vote. She can do a verbal motion, and we can vote on it. So just read it again.
Okay, so the motion is pursuant to SO 1083A4 that the committee continue the study of security and intelligence threats to the elections, and that the study consist of 5 meetings, and that the findings be reported to the House.
Is the committee ready to vote, Mr. Graham?
If we're not going to take the time to have a proper discussion, I'm going to have to vote against it at this time.
Any other debate?
It's up to you.
well,
If we have a
I'm-
proper debate in the future, I'm happy to do that. But if it's now, it's no.
Mr. Cullen, did you? No.
Yeah, I'm trying to decide.
Colleagues, if that's a suggestion of openness to the idea and the concept of studying this, but just the process being used, if it is simply a need to have a conversation between parties or amongst within the party, but there's a serious openness to consider. I think the topic is excellent. Clearly, this is something that we should all be
I'm happy to
preoccupied
have a proper discussion, but we have 6 minutes till the votes.
I understand, and so the time pressure might be a factor. So I wonder to my conservative colleague if this is something that we're interested in doing, if standing it for a moment, but with an indication and a commitment to seriously consider it and even look at maybe making this happen prior to Parliament rising. I think this would be. I just don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say.
Stephanie, it's up to you. We can vote now, or we can discuss it later.
We can discuss it later.
Okay. We'll discuss it as soon as possible. And thank you very much for being effective. And as we talked before, we have estimates at the next couple of meetings, and we'll do these two motions. Yeah.
I do have one other thing to say. The practice of keeping the committee going with unanimous consent. The consent was given for one purpose, and we morphed into several purposes. Nobody did anything wrong, but I think we need to. We agreed to extend it for the purpose of listening to the minister's testimony, and several other items came up. As a practical matter, I think we should discuss that, or be prepared to discuss that when we return to my point of order, because I think this is related to that point of order.
So that's part of your point of order?
Well, it'll be one of the things I think we should all be prepared to discuss at that time.
Okay.
All right, thank you.